There is something strange about being human, something that most people sense, but never look at directly. You can feel it in the moments between things, in the 3 seconds before you reach for your phone without knowing why, in the restlessness that arrives when a room goes quiet, in the way certain conversations leave you exhausted in a way you cannot quite explain. Something is operating beneath the surface, something that makes decisions before you are aware a decision is being made, something that drives behavior that the rational mind would never consciously choose. And most people spend their entire lives never examining it closely, not because they are incurious, but because examining it too closely requires looking at things that are genuinely uncomfortable to see. In this documentary, we are going to look directly at some of the most psychologically unsettling truths about the human mind. We are going to examine why people become obsessed, why comparison feels involuntary, why the phone cannot be put down, why people return to relationships that damage them, why approval from strangers can feel more urgent than the opinion of people who actually know you, why silence has become one of the things modern human beings fear most. And as you listen, you may begin to recognize something in what is being described, not about other people, about the machinery running quietly inside you. That recognition will probably be uncomfortable. That is the point. Most people believe they know themselves. They have a story about who they are, what they value, why they do what they do. But if you observe human behavior carefully enough, you begin to notice something that disrupts that story. A significant portion of what people call personality was never consciously chosen. It was assembled, piece by piece, from fear, from the need to be accepted, from wounds that were never fully understood, from the slow accumulation of responses to pain that eventually hardened into something that felt like character. And the most unsettling part is that most people cannot see where their chosen self ends and their conditioned self begins. The human brain was not designed for peace. This is important to understand, not as an excuse, not as a reason to stop trying, but as a foundation for everything that follows. The brain was designed for survival, and survival across almost the entire span of human existence required one specific cognitive orientation: threat detection. The mind that noticed danger first lived. The mind that relaxed too easily did not pass on its genes. So the architecture you are working with right now, the brain that is listening to this, that is quietly evaluating every piece of information for its relevance to your safety and status, that brain is ancient. It is running software designed for a world that no longer exists, and the result is a profound mismatch between the environment human beings now inhabit and the mind they are using to navigate it, because the threats are different now. The predator is not in the forest. The predator is in the notification, in the comparison, in the silence that follows a message you know was read, in the number beneath a photograph that tells you how many people found it worth acknowledging. The stakes are entirely different, but the nervous system responds with the same urgency it would have reserved for genuine physical danger. This is why a critical comment from a stranger online can ruin an afternoon. This is why being excluded from a social gathering can produce something that feels physically painful. This is why the brain cannot easily distinguish between a threat to survival and a threat to the image of the self it has been carefully constructing and maintaining. To the nervous system, both feel real, both feel urgent, both demand a response. And in that state of constant low-level threat response, the human mind develops habits, coping strategies, patterns of behavior designed to manage the discomfort of existing in a world the brain was not built for. And those patterns, shape everything. Here is something that almost no one wants to hear. Most people say they want happiness, but psychologically, what they are actually seeking is familiarity. And that distinction changes everything, because the brain does not navigate toward what is good for it. It navigates toward what it recognizes, toward the emotional environment that matches the internal map it built early in life before it had the language to question what was being built. This is why people repeat patterns, not because they enjoy the outcome, not because they lack intelligence, but because the nervous system experiences the familiar as safe, even when the familiar is harmful, even when every rational part of the mind is pointing at the exit. Think about what this means in practice. A person who grew up in emotional chaos, where love was inconsistent, where attention had to be earned, where safety was never quite guaranteed, that person's nervous system learned something early. It learned what love feels like, not what love should feel like, not what love is capable of being, but what love felt like in the specific emotional environment where their nervous system was first calibrated. And it filed that away as the template. So when they encounter a relationship that is consistent, warm, stable, predictable in the best sense of the word, the nervous system does not respond with relief. It responds with unease, with the quiet suspicion that something is wrong, that this cannot be trusted, that the calm is temporary, that it is only a matter of time before the familiar pattern reasserts itself. And sometimes, in looking for that familiar pattern, they create it, not consciously, but the body acts on what it knows. And what it knows is the map that was drawn before it had any say in the cartography. Now let's talk about the phone, not as a moral issue, not as a question of discipline or willpower, as a psychological phenomenon, because the reason millions of people cannot put their phone down has nothing to do with weakness. It has to do with how the brain responds to variable reward. The platforms that now occupy several hours of the average human day were not designed accidentally. They were designed with a sophisticated understanding of neurological reward loops. Every scroll is a search, not a conscious search, but a neurological one. The brain scanning for something that will trigger the release of dopamine. Post that provokes, comment that validates, conflict that activates, piece of content that confirms an existing belief or violates one strongly enough to produce outrage, and the key design decision that makes all of this neurologically irresistible is that the reward is unpredictable. You do not know what the next scroll will produce. It might be nothing. It might be something that makes you feel seen or angry or amused or briefly superior or briefly devastated. That unpredictability is the mechanism. The brain, as we have discussed, is not activated by certainty. It is activated by the possibility of reward. And an infinite scroll is neurologically an infinite possibility. The algorithms that power these platforms do not show you what is good for your mental state. They show you what keeps your nervous system activated. And an activated nervous system keeps scrolling. The consequence of this played out across years of daily use is significant. A mind that has been trained to expect constant stimulation begins to experience the absence of stimulation as discomfort, not just boredom, something closer to anxiety. The silence feels wrong. The stillness feels like deprivation, and a person who can no longer sit with their own thoughts without reaching for a screen has lost access to something essential, to the interior life that only becomes audible in the quiet. There is a difference between wanting love and wanting validation. Most people have never examined which one they are actually seeking, because from the inside they can feel almost identical. Both involve another person. Both involve connection. Both produce something that temporarily fills the space where loneliness or insecurity lives, but they operate on entirely different logic. Love, in its genuine form, does not require you to perform, does not require the constant renegotiation of your worth, does not leave you exhausted from the effort of being perceived correctly. Validation is something else. Validation is the temporary relief of having someone confirm that you are enough, smart enough, attractive enough, interesting enough, worthy enough of being chosen. And the temporary nature of that relief is precisely what makes it addictive, because it never lasts. No amount of external confirmation can permanently resolve an internal question. So the search continues. Another relationship, another person whose attention feels like evidence of value, another situation where being chosen confirms briefly that you are worth choosing. And when that person withdraws their attention, even normally, even healthily, even for reasons that have nothing to do with your worth, the nervous system responds as if a verdict has been delivered, as if the temporary absence of validation is proof of what was feared all along, that you are not, and perhaps never were, quite enough. This is not a relationship problem. This is an identity problem wearing the costume of a relationship problem, and solving it by finding a better source of validation is like trying to fill a hole in a boat by adding more water. Let us talk about something that is rarely said directly. Many people do not avoid silence because they are busy. They avoid silence because silence asks questions, and the questions that arrive in genuine quiet, not the distracted half-quiet of a phone in hand, but the real silence of being completely alone with one's own mind. Those questions are the ones that have been carefully avoided. Am I living the life I actually want? Are the people around me here because they know me, or because they know the version of me I perform for them? Is what I call ambition actually driven by desire or by the need to be seen as someone who matters? Do I actually believe the things I say I believe, or do I believe what makes me acceptable to the groups I belong to? These are not comfortable questions. They are the questions that a distracted life successfully avoids. And this is, in part, why the modern world is so convenient for the parts of us that prefer not to look inward. There has never been more available distraction, more content, more noise, more stimulation, more ways to fill every moment with something external. And the psychological cost of that convenience is enormous, because the emotions that are not examined do not disappear. They accumulate. They find their way out through behavior that the conscious mind did not authorize, through the argument that is really about something else, through the obsession with someone who does not deserve the mental real estate being devoted to them, through the decision that makes no rational sense, but that the body insisted on. The unexplored interior does not stay interior forever. It externalizes, and it tends to externalize loudly, in the moments when the person least expects it, when the armor is down, when the distraction is not available, when the silence finally wins. Here is perhaps the most important thing this documentary is trying to say. Most people are not making the choices they think they are making. They are responding to patterns absorbed in childhood before they had the cognitive tools to evaluate them, to emotional templates laid down in experiences they may not even fully remember, to survival strategies developed in response to pain that seemed normal at the time because it was all they knew. These patterns do not announce themselves. They simply operate. They determine who feels attractive and who does not, what situations feel safe, and which produce inexplicable anxiety. Why some people's approval matters enormously while others barely registers. Why certain conversations produce a reaction disproportionate to what was said. Why you are the way you are in the moments when you are most authentically yourself, or most defended, it is difficult to see these patterns from the inside because they are not experienced as patterns. They are experienced as reality, as just the way things are, as personality, as preferences, as the self, and challenging them does not feel like growth. It feels like losing something, like the ground shifting beneath a structure you have spent years building. Because in a very real sense, that is exactly what it is. The good news, if there is good news here, is not that the patterns can be instantly dissolved. They cannot. The nervous system does not update quickly. The good news is simpler than that. It is that the patterns, once seen clearly, lose some of their automatic power. Not all of it, but some. And some is where everything starts. The human mind is not broken. It is not weak. It is not defective. It is ancient. It is doing, with extraordinary precision, exactly what it was built to do, seeking familiarity, avoiding perceived threat, pursuing reward, constructing an identity stable enough to move through the world without constant re-examination. These are not flaws. They are features. Features that kept the species alive across conditions of genuine difficulty. The problem is not the machinery. The problem is the mismatch between the ancient machinery and the modern world it is now being asked to navigate, between the survival-oriented brain and the life that survival-oriented brain is now trying to build, between the patterns formed in pain and the peace that is, perhaps for the first time, actually available. Most people will not examine this closely, not because they cannot, but because the examination requires something that the modern world is specifically designed to prevent. It requires stillness. It requires sitting with discomfort long enough to hear what the discomfort is actually about. It requires asking questions that do not have easy answers, and it requires the willingness to discover that some of what you have called yourself was assembled without your full consent. That is not a small thing to face, but it is the only honest place to begin, because a person who understands their own patterns is no longer entirely at their mercy, not free of them, not instantly transformed, but no longer entirely blind. And there is a significant difference between those two things. One is a person being lived by their history. The other is a person who knows their history is there, who can feel it pulling, and who can, in at least some moments, choose differently. That choice is small, but it is real. And in the architecture of a human life, small real choices made consistently, over time, are the only thing that has ever actually changed anything. The mind that is willing to look at itself clearly is already something different from the mind that refuses to look. That is not a destination. It is a direction, and a direction is enough to begin.